Tonight we trade your pillow for a riverbank in ancient Japan, under a sky just beginning to bleed the deep indigo of a very long evening. The air is cool, thick with the smell of wet earth and night-blooming plants, and the only sound is the constant, whispering rush of water over stone. You're not here for the scenery. You're kneeling in the shallows of a specific river, one whose black sand holds a magnetic secret. Your hands are cold, plunged into the water, sifting through silt and gravel with a shallow wooden pan. You're searching for a particular, slightly heavier grit, satetsu, iron sand. It looks unremarkable, just dark, slightly shimmering grains. But this is the true, unsung beginning of every legendary samurai sword. The ore isn't dug from a mountain. It's gathered, grain by painstaking grain, from the embrace of the water. It's a humble, muddy start for a weapon destined for divinity, and given the back-breaking labor, the years of apprenticeship, and the sheer number of ways you can be burned, maimed, or disappointed over the coming months, you probably won't survive this process with your sanity, or all 10 fingers, intact. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The pan in your hands is called a zaru, and your motion is a slow, rhythmic dance. Swirl, settle, tilt, discard. The lighter sand and pebbles wash away over the lip, the heavier black grains cling to the bottom. It's meditative, in a brutally monotonous way. Your back aches. Your knees are numb from the cold riverbed. A historical fact, widely accepted but mind-bending when you're actually doing it. This single source, this iron sand, was the primary basis for all traditional Japanese steel for centuries, isolated by geography and choice from the iron ore mines of the continent. You're participating in a chain of production that remained virtually unchanged from the late Kofun period right into the 19th century. You'll need a mountain of this sand. Literally. For one sword, you might process over 10 tons of sand to yield enough quality steel. That's why you're not alone on this bank. Shadowy figures work up and down the stream, their own pans whispering in the dark. The satetsu isn't pure. It's a mix of magnetite and other minerals, a rusty offering from the volcanic mountains that feeds these rivers. The quality varies from region to region, and masters had their secret sources, passed down like heirlooms. There's a lesser-known, slightly amusing detail here. Sometimes, the best iron sand wasn't found in rivers at all, but in seemingly unremarkable hillsides. Resourceful smelters would literally follow certain species of bamboo, whose roots seemed to thrive in iron-rich soil, using the plants as natural prospecting tools. Think of it as ancient, botanical metal detecting. As your basket slowly fills with the glistening, damp grit, you consider its nature. This isn't a clean, uniform material. It's capricious. Its impurity is its defining feature, and the entire art you're about to undertake isn't about imposing perfection on pure metal, but about coaxing order from this inherent chaos. Historians still argue whether this fundamental constraint, the use of impure, sandy iron, was a limitation that Japanese smiths ingeniously overcame, or the very catalyst that forced them to develop their unique, layered, and infinitely complex sword-making philosophy. Was the masterpiece born in spite of the sand, or because of it? You heft the basket, the weight settling into your sore muscles. There's no answer in the heft, only potential. The first phase is complete. You have your raw earth. Now, you must turn it into a star. The walk back from the river is silent, save for the crunch of gravel underfoot and the distant cry of a night bird. The sand is transported to a clearing where a strange, low structure awaits, looking like a long, sloped clay loaf pan dug into the earth. This is the tatara, the soul furnace. It's not your forge, not yet. It's something more primal. Your gathered sand will be fed into this belly over 3 days and nights of relentless fire, a smelting operation of such scale and demanded endurance that it feels less like craft and more like a slow, controlled volcano. You deposit your basket with the others, a small contribution to the coming inferno. The head smelter, the Murage, gives a silent nod. His world is one of fire, air, and timing, where the difference between glorious steel and worthless slag is measured in breaths and charcoal feeds. Your part in this first, foundational act is done. You are a gatherer, a provider. But soon, you will have to become something else entirely. For now, you watch as the first preparations begin. The careful drying of the sand, the sorting of the charcoal, the chanting prayers to the fire kami. The night is no longer quiet. It's filling with the tension of a beginning. The Tatara furnace is no mere hearth. It's a fortress of earth and straw, a temporary temple built for a single, violent act of creation. You've moved from the river's chill to a realm of impending heat. For the last day, you've been a laborer, mixing clay, sand, and rice straw, yes, rice straw, into thick, plastic mud. Your hands are caked with it. You and the other apprentices have built up the walls on a wooden frame, forming a long, rectangular box about chest high, with a gently sloping floor and a series of holes along its sides. It looks like a slumbering, mud brick beast. This is precise, sacred architecture. The rice straw isn't just binder. When it burns out during the preheating, it leaves a network of tiny channels that make the clay walls breathable, able to withstand the monstrous thermal stress to come. You're not just building a container for fire, you're engineering a lung for it. Now, as the sun dips, the Murage performs the ritual purification. He scatters salt, offers sake to the four directions. The air is solemn, thick with anticipation. The first layer of charcoal is lit at the furnace's mouth, and the bellows, massive lever-operated wooden organs called fuego, begin their rhythmic, groaning work. You take your turn at one, your body falling into the push-pull cadence. It's a full-body metronome. Creak, whoosh. Creak, whoosh. You're not pumping air, you're feeding a heartbeat. Once a bed of glowing coals is established, the first alternating layers begin. A basket of your carefully dried Satetsu iron sand is spread evenly over the fire, followed by another thick layer of charcoal. Then more sand. Then more charcoal. The process is hypnotic, a slow, deliberate stratification of earth and fuel. The heat builds. It starts as a warmth on your face, then becomes a dry slap, then a physical wall you lean against. The smell transforms from wood smoke to something sharper, more metallic, the scent of rock being undone. For 3 days and 3 nights, this will not stop. The firing crew works in shifts, but the Murage never truly rests. His eyes are fixed on the color of the flames licking from the vent holes, on the smell of the exhaust, on the subtle sounds from within the clay beast. He commands more charcoal here, less sand there, adjusts the tempo of the bellows. This is his orchestra, and the music is one of roaring transformation. You catch sleep in frantic, hour-long naps on a nearby pallet. The furnace's glow painting the inside of your eyelids orange. The fuego's groan the bass note of your dreams. Here lies a widely accepted historical fact that underscores the scale of this endeavor. A single Tatara smelt, called a karaoshi, typically consumed over 10 tons of charcoal and 8 tons of iron sand to produce perhaps 2 tons of raw, heterogeneous steel bloom. The efficiency seems appalling by modern standards, but the goal was never bulk pure iron. It was to create a specific, spiritually and materially charged substance, tamahagane. The furnace itself, this temporary earthwork, was so central to Japanese steelmaking that its very design is protected as an intangible cultural asset. You are not an observer of history, you are sweating at its fiery heart. As the hours blur into a soot-stained continuum, you learn the lesser-known, utterly critical role of the ash. The charcoal isn't just fuel, it's a chemical agent. In the furnace's hellish interior, carbon from the burning charcoal slowly, reluctantly migrates into the melting iron sand. But the ash from the charcoal, mostly a compound called potassium carbonate, forms a fluid slag. This slag, a liquid glass, does the essential work of scavenging impurities like silicon and phosphorus from the iron, carrying them away. It's a natural, self-regulating flux. You see evidence of it sometimes, a glowing, honey-like substance weeping from a lower tap hole, the furnace shedding its waste. Historians still argue whether the unique properties of Japanese white charcoal, Binkaton, made from specific evergreen oaks, were deliberately chosen for this perfect ash chemistry, or if it was a happy accident of resource availability that the smelting masters then learned to exploit to its fullest. Was it design, or discovery born of necessity? In the heat of the moment, the question melts away. There is only the process. By the third day, you are a ghost of soot and fatigue, moving on instinct. The furnace is a pulsating monolith, radiating a heat that parches the throat from 20 feet away. The final layers have been added. Now, it's a matter of sustaining the peak heat, of letting the alchemy complete. The Murage's face is grim, etched in flame light. This is the most delicate time. Too hot, and too much carbon is burned away, leaving soft, useless iron. Too cool, and the carbon doesn't absorb properly, leaving the steel brittle and high in impurities. The bellows rhythm is frantic now, a final sprint. Then, with a signal that seems to come from his very bones, the Murage calls a halt. The Fuego fall silent. The sudden absence of their groan is deafening. The only sound is the crackle and sigh of the furnace itself, cooling from the inside, settling. You stare at the quieted clay form. Inside, hidden under tons of slag and residual charcoal, is the fruit of all this labor, the kera, the bloom. It is not a sword. It is not even a bar of steel. It is a chaotic, spongy, glittering mass of steel, iron, and slag, a metallic tumor that holds both magnificent potential and utter disappointment within its crude form. You will not see it yet. You must wait. For now, you collapse, the exhaustion of physical weight, the image of the glowing furnace seared into your vision. The first great trial is over. The earth has given up its treasure, but it is still buried, raw and screaming silently in its earthen womb. Tomorrow, you break it open. The weight is a form of torture. The massive Tatara furnace, once a roaring heart of light and sound, now sits like a dormant volcano, radiating a deep, residual warmth that warps the air above it. You sleep a dead, dreamless sleep for 12 hours, your body reclaiming itself. When you wake, every muscle shrieks in protest, but there's a new electric current in the compound, the anticipation of the reveal. The clay shell must cool enough to be broken apart, but not so much that the bloom inside becomes a nightmare to extract. Timing, as always, is everything. You drink weak tea and eat rice, your eyes never leaving the darkening mound. Finally, the Murage gives the nod. With heavy iron bars and hammers, you and the other apprentices begin the careful demolition. This isn't destruction, it's a birth. You strike the baked clay walls, which crack and fall away in great, curved chunks, still warm to the touch. The interior is a geological cross-section of the inferno, layers of ash, partially burned charcoal, and strange, glossy flows of obsidian-like slag. The smell is acrid, a mix of burnt minerals and hot earth. You work carefully, clearing the debris until, at the core, you see it. The tamahagane bloom, or kera, is nothing like you pictured. It's not a neat ingot. It's a grotesque, magnificent lump, roughly the size of a large trunk, clinging to a forest of charcoal stumps and veined with solidified slag. It glitters dully in the daylight where exposed metal catches the sun, a galaxy of steely sparks trapped in a rocky matrix. It looks more like a meteorite than the heart of a future sword. This is the raw, unrefined soul you've sacrificed 3 days to create. Using long tongs and hooks, you and the others wrestle the monstrous, still warm mass from its cradle and onto a heavy wooden sled. It's immensely heavy, not just with metal, but with the weight of spent effort. This is where the real work of selection begins. The Murage, now wielding a heavy sledgehammer, approaches the bloom. His first strikes are exploratory, ringing blows that chip away the worst of the slag crust. With each impact, the bloom fractures, revealing its inner character. Some parts are a porous, crumbly iron, almost like a rusty sponge. This is Zuku, low-carbon iron, useful but soft. Other sections shine with a finer, brighter, more solid grain. This is the prized high-carbon steel, the tamahagane proper. And there will be worthless, brittle chunks too high in impurities, destined for the scrap pile. A widely accepted historical fact is that from that 2-ton bloom, only a small fraction, perhaps less than a third, will be of the quality suitable for a sword's cutting edge. The rest becomes material for tools, fittings, or armor, or is simply recycled in the next smelt. Nothing is wasted, but the hierarchy is absolute. You are handed a smaller hammer and directed to a section. Your job is to break the bloom down further, sorting the pieces by eye and by the sound they make when struck. It's your first lesson in listening to steel. A clear, ringing fracture suggests higher carbon content. A dull thud indicates softer iron. Your hands become blackened, your arms jarred with each swing. It's brutal, physical archaeology. A lesser-known detail from this phase involves the byproduct you're chipping away, the slag. This glassy waste, known as noroi, wasn't just discarded. In some regions, it was ground up and used as an abrasive in the preliminary sword polishing process, or even as a component in pottery glazes. The sword-making cycle sought to use everything, even its own excretions. As you pile the sorted fragments into different baskets, the bright, hard pieces for the sword's skin, kawagane, the somewhat softer pieces for its core, shingane, the Murage moves among you, inspecting. He picks up pieces, turns them in the light, and sometimes tosses them into a different pile with a grunt. His judgment is law. Historians still argue whether the legendary consistency of swords from certain schools and eras was due primarily to the smith's transcendent skill, or to the accidental geological consistency of the iron sand from their specific river source, giving them a more uniform raw material to start with. Was the master's genius in overcoming variability, or in having less variability to overcome? Watching the Murage sort through a pile of fragments that range from dull gray to silvery blue, you suspect it's a combination of both, a dialogue between oath and artisan. By the end of the day, you have baskets of categorized potential. The bloom, that chaotic cosmic lump, has been tamed into organized heaps. They look like piles of strange, metallic potatoes. But in these piles lies the destiny of blades. The Murage points to the basket of the finest, highest carbon steel. That, he says, his voice hoarse from smoke and command, is the spirit. The rest is the body. The metaphor is clear. You will need both. You haul the baskets to the forge building, a separate, smaller structure with a different fire. The earth furnace has spoken. Its product is here. Now, you must learn to converse with it, to argue with it, to persuade it to become something more than glittering fragments. The hammering you've done today was destructive, a breaking apart. Tomorrow, you begin the hammering that builds. But first, you must learn to truly see and hear what you've been given. The sorted piles of steel and iron fragments sit in your forge, inert and silent. But before fire can touch them, you must become a judge. This is not about intuition. It's a harsh, empirical education. The Murage has moved on, his work with the Tatara complete. Now, the swordsmith, the Katana Kaji, takes center stage. He is a different kind of man, lean where the smelter was stout, with a gaze that feels like a physical pressure. He doesn't speak much. He demonstrates. Your first lesson, the fracture test. He selects a fragment of the presumed high-carbon tamahagane from the spirit basket. Placing it on a heavy anvil set in a tree stump, a dobashi, he positions a sharp chisel-like tool called a haja against its edge. A single, precise hammer blow. The fragment cracks in two. He holds the pieces up to the light filtering through the forge's paper windows. The broken surface, the harder in its most primitive form, should reveal a fine, silvery, sugar-like grain. See, he grunts. It's not smooth like broken glass, it's crystalline. A coarse, dull, or gray fracture means lower carbon, or worse, hidden impurities. You will spend hours doing this, breaking precious fragments, training your eyes to read the story in the snap. It feels blasphemous, destroying the material you worked so hard to create, but it's a necessary sacrifice for knowledge. A widely accepted historical fact is that this method of quality assessment, judging steel by its fracture, was so trusted it was used for final acceptance tests on finished blades by discerning samurai customers. They would examine the harder at the blade's tang, the one part left unpolished, to judge the smith's material and workmanship. But the fracture test is only half the story. The smith now takes a smaller, thinner sliver from another piece. He walks to a grindstone toned by a foot pedal. With a few swift passes, he creates a sharp edge on the sliver. Then, in a move that seems almost casual, he clamps it in a vise and strikes it with a file. Not to cut it, but to draw a spark. You lean in. The stream of sparks that flies off is a tiny, brilliant autobiography. High-carbon steel throws a volley of bright, branching, star-based sparks that travel a good distance. Lower carbon iron produces a straighter, duller, redder spark that dies quickly. The smith calls it reading the flower. It's a quick, dirty, and remarkably effective spectrography. You practice on fragments from different baskets, seeing the spark trail tell you what the fracture surface confirmed. Your eyes learn to differentiate the bursting white chrysanthemum of good sword steel from the feeble, orange willow leaf of soft iron. Here's a lesser-known, slightly amusing detail. This spark testing wasn't confined to the forge. Historical accounts suggest that enterprising swordsmiths, when sourcing steel from traders or other smelters, would sometimes perform a covert version. They'd secretly scrape a sample with a concealed knife or file during negotiation, judging the spark stream reflected in a darkened piece of pottery or a bowl of water to assess the quality without revealing their hand. It was metallurgical espionage. After a day of snapping and sparking, your understanding is visceral. You no longer see just lumps of metal. You see personalities. The high-carbon steel is proud, brittle, and brilliant. The medium-carbon material is more balanced, resilient. The low-carbon iron is malleable, quiet, and strong in its own way. The smith has you arrange the judged pieces into a new, more precise hierarchy. The very best, with the finest fracture and brightest spark, is set aside for the sword's outer jacket, the kawagane, which will form the lethal edge and the beautiful surface skin. The good, but slightly softer steel, becomes candidate for the inner core, the shingane. The tough iron is for the back of the blade or other parts. Historians still argue whether the traditional Japanese focus on carbon content as the primary qualitative measure caused them to overlook or undervalue the role of other trace elements that might have been present in their setetsu, elements like manganese or tungsten, which could have subtly influenced the steel's hardenability or toughness. Were they masters of the one variable they could perceive, blind to others they couldn't? In the forge, with the language of spark and fracture, such debates are academic. The steel tells you what it is. You learn to listen. The judged and sorted pieces are still just fragments. To become a sword, they must become one. The smith shows you the next step, creating the initial packets. You take a pile of the best high-carbon fragments and arrange them carefully on a piece of thin paper. Yes, paper, into a rough rectangular pile. The paper will burn away in the forge, but it helps hold the fragments together for that crucial first heating. You bind the packet loosely with wet rice straw cord. It looks like a primitive, metallic sandwich. This packet is called a tekotsu. You will make several. Each one is a commitment, a bet placed on your judgment. If you misread a fragment, if a hidden flaw lies within, it could ruin not just that piece, but the entire consolidated block after days of work. The weight of the decision settles on you. The hammering and folding to come will be a physical ordeal, but this judgment, is the intellectual and intuitive core of the craft. You have learned to break steel to understand it. Now, you must use that understanding to begin building it back up, into something greater than the sum of its sparkling parts. The anvil awaits, but your mind has already done the first, most critical forging. The forge fire, now, is your sun. It's a sun you control, banked in a square hearth of clay and stone called an orori. You work the bellows with your foot, a smaller, more intimate companion to the great fuego of the tatara. The rhythm is quicker, more personal. Your world has shrunk from the monumental scale of the smelting furnace to the focused intensity of this single flame. The packet of steel fragments you bound, the tekotsu, is in your tongs, a black lump against the roaring orange heart of the coals. You are not just heating it, you are bringing it to a specific, critical marriage with the fire. The smith watches, his arms crossed, a silent monument of expectation. The paper and straw binding vanish in a puff of flame. The fragments inside, those judged pieces of tamahagane, begin to glow a deep cherry red, then a brighter orange, and finally, at the peak of the heat, a vigorous, vibrant yellow, almost white at the very center. This is the color of surrender. This is when the steel becomes plastic, when the crystalline structures within loosen their bonds and allow themselves to be reshaped. You pull the glowing mass from the fire, place it swiftly on the anvil, and lift your hammer. The first blow is not delicate. It's a firm, thundering strike from the Katana Kaji himself, who has taken the primary hammer to demonstrate. The impact sends a shower of brilliant orange sparks cascading to the dirt floor, like a reverse meteor shower. The sound is a deep, resonant clang that vibrates up your arms and into your teeth. This first strike begins to weld the individual fragments into a coherent whole. Then it's your turn. You take up a lighter hammer, the kozuchi, and begin to work around the edges of the mass, following the smith's lead. Your job is to consolidate, to forge weld the pieces together, driving out the microscopic pockets of air and slag that lurk between them. Clang. Tap tap tap. Clang. It's a duet. The smith's heavy hammer sets the direction and major deformation. Your lighter blows smooth and refine. The steel dims from yellow to orange to a dull red, its plasticity fading with each lost degree. Just before it turns black, the smith gives a grunt. You stop. The lump, now slightly flattened and welded, goes back into the fire. You work the bellows, bringing it back to that vital yellow glow. This cycle, heat, hammer, cool, reheat, will be your entire existence for days. This process is called shitakaiti, the foundation forging. Its primary purpose is not to shape a sword, but to homogenize the steel. You are essentially kneading the metal like the world's most unforgiving bread dough. After several heats to consolidate the initial packet, the smith has you draw the block out into a long, flat bar. Then, with a chisel, he cuts a deep notch halfway through its length. He folds it over upon itself, hammering the fold shut. You have just doubled the number of layers. That bar will be heated, drawn out, notched, and folded again. And again. And again. A widely accepted historical fact is that traditional swordsmiths aimed for a specific number of folding cycles, often between 10 and 16, resulting in tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of individual layers. But here's the crucial, often misunderstood point. They weren't just counting layers for the sake of a big number. Each fold and weld served to further distribute carbon and slag inclusions more evenly, creating a steel that was uniform in its inconsistency, a material both incredibly tough and capable of holding a lethal edge. You lose count of the heats. Your world becomes the color of the steel, the sound of the hammer, the ache in your shoulder. The block becomes darker, denser, more alive in your tongs. A lesser-known detail emerges in the texture of the anvil's surface. It's not mirror smooth. It's intentionally kept slightly rough, almost like a very fine file. This texture, transferred in microscopic ways to the hot steel during hammering, helps the smith gauge the metal's condition by the grip and sound of the hammer blows, and some believe it even initiates the complex grain structure that will later be revealed in polishing. As you fold and refold, a patina of scale, a black, flaky oxide, forms on the steel's surface with each heating. You brush it off with a wire whisk before each hammering session, but some is inevitably hammered in. Historians still argue whether this incorporated scale, seen later as darker lines in the grain pattern, was considered a desirable aesthetic mark of the hand-forging process, or an unavoidable flaw that masters sought to minimize, with the legendary schools being defined by who could keep their steel the cleanest. Is the harder grain pattern a record of perfection, or a beautiful fossil of the struggle to achieve it? Your arms are too tired to care about the philosophy. The block is becoming pure. It is shedding its fragmented past, becoming a unified entity under your hammer. It is no longer a pile of satetsu. It is steel. And soon, it must remember it was once two different things, and become a composite of hard and soft, of spirit and body, all over again. The folded block you've created is a masterpiece of uniformity. It is consistent through and through, a homogenized ingot of purified, high-carbon steel. For a tool, this would be the end goal. For a sword, it is a disaster waiting to happen. A blade made solely from this hard, brittle material would be like a pane of glass, razor sharp, and shattering on the first impact. The genius of the katana lies not in a single type of steel, but in its secret architecture. You are about to become a blacksmithing surgeon, assembling different steels into a living, layered whole. The smith directs you to prepare two new blocks. From your pile of judged fragments, you now select the very best of your folded high-carbon steel. This will become the sword's skin, the tamahagane, jacket steel. You also take a block of the softer, more ductile low-carbon iron or very mild steel you prepared separately. This will be the core, the shingane. They sit side by side on the anvil, the hard, brilliant tamahagane and the tough, mute shingane. The smith takes the hard steel block and, with a few skilled heats and hammer blows, draws it out into a long, U-shaped channel, like a slender, metallic canoe. It's a delicate operation. The walls of the U must be even, the trough deep and clean. This channel is the future of the blade's surface and its lethal edge. Next, he takes the soft core steel and forges it into a flat bar that fits snugly inside the U-shaped channel. The fit must be precise. You help by filing and grinding any minor imperfections. Once satisfied, the smith places the core into the channel. Then comes a moment of profound transformation. He heats the entire assembly, the hard U cradling the soft core, to welding temperature. The color is critical, that same vibrant, yellow-white. When he pulls it from the fire, you see the two different materials glowing as one, their boundaries blurred by the incandescent heat. He places it on the anvil. The first hammer blow to seal the package is gentle, a tap along the spine to settle the core. Then, with increasing force, he works down the sides, welding the lips of the hard U-channel closed over the soft core. Sparks fly, but they are different now, a mixture of the bright stars from the jacket and the duller red streaks from the core's impurities being expelled. You are witnessing the birth of kobasjiti, the most common and classic lamination method. A widely accepted historical fact is that this composite construction is what gives the katana its legendary combination of hardness and resilience. The hard kawagane forms the razor-sharp edge that can be polished to an atom-splitting fineness. The soft shingane acts as a shock absorber, allowing the blade to bend under impact rather than snap, and making it easier to straighten if it does warp. It is a perfect martial yin and yang, forged into a single entity. But the assembly isn't always this simple. The smith explains, between heats, that there are other, more complex methods. Shihozyum, four-sided wrap, wariha tetsu, inserted edge, and the legendary makurajiti, core-wrapped, where a hard steel core is entirely enveloped by softer iron, which is then itself enveloped by hard steel again, a steel sandwich of staggering complexity. The choice depends on the school, the smith's tradition, and the intended purpose of the blade. A lesser-known, surprising detail is that sometimes, a third piece of steel was added. A small triangle of the absolute hardest, highest carbon steel, inserted specifically at the very point of the cutting edge before the final weld. This hagane, edge steel, would ensure the very tip of the sword had maximum hardness, a secret reinforcement for the moment of piercing. Once the basic jacket and core block is welded solid, the work is not done. It must be drawn out, lengthened, and its cross-section shaped. But now, when you hammer, you are working a composite material. The smith pays close attention to the flow of the steel. He aims to draw the hard jacket steel thinly and evenly over the entire surface, ensuring no part of the soft core is accidentally exposed on the edge or the flat of the blade, which would create a fatal weak point. Historians still argue whether the specific lamination patterns were developed primarily for functional performance, distributing stress in optimal ways, or if they were, in part, a form of cryptographic signature, a way for a smith or school to embed their handwriting into the very body of the blade, a signature only visible upon final polishing or in the tragic event of a breakage. Is the internal structure engineering or art? As you watch the smith carefully hammer the composite block, elongating it with a focus that seems to see through the steel to its hidden layers, you realize it is a question without a division. The function is the art. The strength is the signature. The newly assembled billet, now a welded, elongated bar, cools on the anvil. To the untrained eye, it's just a rough piece of blackened metal. But you know its secret heart. It is no longer uniform. It has a soul and a body, a hard shell and a soft spirit. It is pregnant with a blade. The next step will be to give that potential its first true shape, to draw the form of a sword from this composite stone. But for now, you let it rest. The marriage is complete. The separate steels have become one flesh, awaiting the sculptor's hand. The composite billet rests, a dormant log of layered potential. Now, you must draw the sword from it. This is not sculpting in the subtractive sense. It is a coaxing, a persuading of form from mass. The smith reheats the billet to a bright orange. He places it on the anvil, not flat, but tilted at an angle. His first hammer blows are not aimed at lengthening, but at defining the mune, the back of the blade. A series of precise, angled strikes create the gentle ridge that runs along the spine. It's a subtle line, but it establishes the blade's fundamental geometry. From this backbone, everything else will flow. Now, the drawing out begins in earnest. You work the bellows, maintaining a steady, hot fire. The smith heats a section of the billet, pulls it, and hammers, moving the steel like a slow, molten taffy. He is not just making it longer, he is controlling its taper, both in width and, more crucially, in thickness. The point near the tang, nakago, must be thick and robust to absorb the shock of impact. The tip, kisaki, must thin gracefully to a fine, piercing geometry. Your eyes learn to follow the line of the shinogi, the rich line that divides the flat of the blade from the beveled edge. This line is not stamped, it emerges from the hammer's dialogue with the steel's internal resistance. With each heat and hammer sequence, the rough shape of a blade becomes more apparent. The gentle curve, sorai, the distinction between the tang and the polished section, habakimoto, the basic outline of the tip. This process is called tsunobe. The bar is becoming a blank, a crude sword-shaped object. It is thick, its surfaces are rough with scale and hammer marks, and its edge is a blunt, rounded wedge. But its proportions are there, held in the smith's mind and translated through rhythm and heat. A widely accepted historical fact is that the distinctive curve of the katana is not primarily achieved by bending the steel. It is a result of differential cooling during quenching, a later, terrifying step. However, a subtle, preliminary curve is often forged in at this tsunobe stage. The smith achieves this by hammering one side of the blade, usually the edge side, slightly more than the other, or by quenching the tsunobe in water briefly to create a slight warp, which is then used as a guide for the final shape. The curve is imagined now, but will be decided later. The work is incredibly physical, but also requires a feather-light touch. One heavy blow in the wrong place can thin the hard jacket steel too much, exposing the soft core at the edge, a flaw that cannot be undone. The smith's concentration is absolute. He constantly rotates the blade, checking its symmetry, its straightness, or intended slight curve, the flow of the shinogi. He uses simple wooden templates sometimes, held against the hot steel, but mostly he relies on an eye calibrated by decades. You hand him tools, different shaped hammers, a Nazuchi for planishing the flat surfaces, a sen cold chisel for cutting the hot metal when separating the tang from the blade blank. Here lies a lesser known, practical detail. The anvil itself, the dobashi, is not a single piece. It's often a large, heavy block with several holes and slots of different shapes punched through it. During drawing, the smith will sometimes place a section of the hot blade over a hole to support it while hammering a specific area, like the start of the tang, allowing for precise deformation without collapsing the rest of the form. It's a simple jig system, centuries old. As the blank nears its final rough dimensions, the smith performs a critical operation. With the steel at a black heat, he takes a sharp chisel and makes a series of shallow cuts along the edge of the blank. These are high grooves, or sometimes a distinct bohi, a broad groove along the flat of the blade. Historians still argue whether the primary purpose of these grooves was to lighten the blade and improve balance, to stiffen the structure, like an I-beam, or to simply make a distinctive, identifying aesthetic mark, or all three simultaneously. Some even suggest that in a prolonged battle, the grooves could reduce suction if the blade pierced deeply into a body, making it easier to withdraw. The truth is likely a combination of practical and personal expression. The smith you work with makes a single, deep bohi with a graceful, tapering end. It is his mark, his voice in the steel's song. Finally, the tsunobe is complete. You hold the rough, blackened, sword-shaped blank. It is heavy, crude, and ugly. It has no edge, no polish, no beauty. But it has intention. Every line points towards a finished katana. It is the raw clay after the armature has been built. The most dramatic, most dangerous, and most defining act of the entire process now lies ahead. But first, you must prepare not the steel, but a coating of mud. The blank must be dressed for its trial by fire and water. The forged blank, the tsunobe, lies cooling on the anvil, its shape a promise in sooty steel. Now, you enter one of the most secretive, ritualized phases of the craft, applying the yakibutsuchi, the tempering clay. This is where science blurs into alchemy, and the smith's recipe is as guarded as a family heirloom. The sword's soul, its visual signature and its functional heart, the Hammond temper line, will be born from this mud. The smith brings out a small, lidded stoneware jar. Inside is a fine, grayish-black powder, clay from the bed of a specific river, collected in a specific season, and aged for years, sometimes decades. This is the base. To it, he adds other ingredients in precise proportions. Crushed charcoal powder, for insulation. A little powdered iron oxide, sometimes. A whisper of ground stone, perhaps sandstone or quartz. The exact mixture is his go-kui, his ultimate secret. He adds water, and you are tasked with mixing it with a wooden spatula, achieving a consistency he judges perfect. Not too runny, not too stiff, like the smoothest, densest peanut butter. The smell is earthy, primal. The application is a meditation in precision. First, the blade must be perfectly clean. You painstakingly remove all scale and soot from the sunobe with files and sandstones, until the bare metal shines with a dull gray luster. Any impurity left on the surface will interfere with the clay's bond and ruin the pattern. Then, the smith takes over. Using a small bamboo spatula, he begins painting the clay onto the blade, starting with the spine, the mune. He applies a relatively thick, even layer here, perhaps 1/4 of an inch. This is the insulator. Its job is to slow the cooling of the spine during the quench, keeping it soft and flexible. Then, he moves to the edge. Here, his touch becomes calligraphic. He applies a much thinner layer of clay, following a line just a millimeter or two above the blunt edge itself. But he doesn't just paint a straight line. His hand moves with a subtle, practiced tremor, creating a wavy, undulating pattern. He might create gentle hills and valleys, not sudden, dramatic peaks, gunome, or choppy, rhythmic patterns, choji-shaped like cloves. This is the pattern of the future hamon. The thin clay here will crack and flake off quickly in the furnace, allowing the edge to cool rapidly in the water, transforming it into super hard martensite crystal. The thicker clay on the spine and body will hold the heat, leaving those areas in a softer, more ductile state. The boundary between the two cooling rates manifests as the visible hamon. A widely accepted historical fact is that this clay tempering process, known as differential hardening, is what creates the katana's characteristic physical properties. But the hamon is not merely a temper line, it is a controlled crack front, a frozen record of the moment the blade met the water. The tiny, sparkling crystals, nai, and the misty, cloud-like regions, nioi, within the hamon are the visual evidence of this metallurgical earthquake. As the smith works, he might use other tools, a feather, a sliver of bamboo, to texture the clay, to create ashi, legs of thicker clay that extend from the spine down into the edge zone. These ashi will cause isolated patches of slower cooling within the edge, creating softer, tougher areas within the hard edge to act as crack arresters, preventing a single flaw from propagating across the entire blade. It's a microscopic damage control system rendered in mud. A lesser-known, slightly amusing detail involves the final, ultra-thin application right on the very edge. Some smiths would use their fingertip or thumb to wipe almost all the clay off the very cutting edge, leaving a mere molecular film. Others would use a straw bristle to flick away excess, creating a perfectly clean, bare metal line. This ensured the edge would quench with maximum hardness. The method was personal, almost superstitious. Once the main body is coated, the smith carefully applies clay to the tang, nakago. This area is coated completely and evenly, as it must not be hardened at all, It needs to remain soft to be filed and adjusted for the hilt. Finally, he uses a fine, pointed tool to inscribe his signature, his mai, into the wet clay on the tang. This signature will be baked into the steel during the heating, and will remain after the clay is knocked off. Historians still argue whether the spectacularly complex Hammond patterns of certain famous schools were purely the result of aesthetic claywork artistry, or if they were an intuitive, centuries-old method of managing complex thermal and stress gradients that modern engineers are only now beginning to map with finite element analysis software. Was it beautiful accident, or sublime, undocumented physics? The smith doesn't ponder this. He blows gently on the clay to begin the drying process, checking for any cracks or drips. You are instructed to place the coated blade in a quiet, warm, draft-free corner of the forge to dry slowly, over many hours. Rushing this risks the clay cracking or peeling. So you wait again, watching the mud turn from dark gray to pale gray as it dries. The blade is now asleep, dressed in its earthen cocoon. It looks nothing like a weapon. It looks like a strange, muddy artifact. But beneath that clay, the steel remembers its loud self, and awaits the single most violent and defining moment of its life. The fire is being prepared. The water is being drawn. The blade is dressed for its wedding to the cold. The clay-coated blade is dry, its earthy shell a dull, chalky gray. The atmosphere in the forge is now charged with a sacred tension. The ordinary workday sounds are gone. The smith has purified himself, changed into clean clothes. This is no longer craft, it is ceremony. The yakiaya, the quenching, is the moment of truth upon which months of labor pivot. It is a thermodynamic tightrope walk over a chasm of failure. A new, deeper, narrower hearth has been prepared, its charcoal glowing with a clean, even heat. The water tub, the mizuoke, is not just any water. It is water from a specific well or stream, its temperature carefully monitored, usually lukewarm, around 40 degrees Celsius 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Too cold, and the thermal shock could shatter the blade. Too warm, and it won't quench hard enough. The smith positions the tub so the blade will enter the water edge first, at precisely the correct angle, in a single, smooth, plunging motion. There will be no hesitation, no correction. You are given a single, solemn duty, to maintain the fire. The smith takes the blade, gripping the clay-coated tang with heavy tongs. He holds it parallel to the ground, edge down, and introduces it slowly into the special hearth. He does not shove it into the coals. He suspends it above them, letting the radiant heat warm it gradually, evenly. The goal is to bring the entire blade up to a critical temperature, around 750 to 800 degrees Celsius, 1382 to 1472 degrees Fahrenheit, where the steel's internal structure becomes austenite, ready for transformation. The clay coating does its job, causing the blade to heat unevenly. The thinly coated edge glows a bright, cherry red first, while the thickly coated spine remains a darker shadow. You watch, barely breathing, as the heat crawls up the blade. This is the most dangerous part of the heating. A hot spot, a draft, a moment too long, and the steel will burn, its carbon content irreparably damaged. The smith's eyes are locked on the color of the steel visible at the edge, where the clay is thinnest. He is looking for a specific shade of red that has a faint, almost ethereal yellow or white brilliance to it. The color of the moon seen through autumn haze, some poets said. It is not a color you can be taught, it is recognized by a lifetime of instinct. A widely accepted historical fact is that the precise temperature for quenching is one of the most closely guarded secrets of a swordsmithing school. Being off by even a small margin could mean the difference between a legendary blade and a pile of scrap. The smith rotates the blade slowly, ensuring an even soak at that critical temperature. The moment lasts an eternity. Then, In one fluid, explosive motion, he pulls the blade from the fire and in the same arc, plunges it straight down into the waiting water with a sharp, hissing cry. Sigh. The sound is violent, a roar of anger from the steel. A cloud of steam erupts, filling the forge with a thick, hot mist that smells of wet earth and hot metal. The blade is submerged. For 3 seconds, 5 seconds, he holds it perfectly still, perfectly straight, in the roiling water. This is when the transformation happens. At the molecular level, the edge, cooling at a rate of thousands of degrees per second, undergoes a forced change from austenite to martensite, a super hard, needle-like crystal structure that locks the carbon in place. The spine and body, cooled slowly by the insulating clay, transform into softer, tougher perlite and ferrite. The stresses are unimaginable. The edge tries to expand as it becomes martensite, while the cooler spine contracts. This conflict is what creates the blade's final curve, the sorai. It is also what can cause it to warp catastrophically, or scream apart in a fatal crack. You hear it before you see it, a sharp ping, like a broken piano string, or a lower groan from the water. Your heart stops. But the smith doesn't flinch. He is listening, too. After the critical few seconds, he begins to move the blade gently in the water, cooling it more evenly now that the transformation is locked in. Finally, he lifts it, steaming, from the tub. The blade is born. It is no longer a blank. It is a katana, in essence. The clay coating is shattered, most of it fallen away in the water. The metal beneath is a mottled blue, gray, and straw yellow from the oxides formed in that instant of trauma, the yakiba colors. And there, visible even through the steam and scale, you can see the ghost of the hamon. A faint, white, wavy line tracing the path where the smith's clay pattern was, a whisper of the fury that just passed through the steel. It is there. It worked. A lesser known, crucial detail, the angle and straightness of the plunge are vital. If the blade enters the water slightly twisted or angled, the cooling front will travel unevenly across the edge, creating asymmetric stresses that guarantee a warp or a crack. The smith's body is a machine of pure intention during that plunge. His muscles remember the correct motion from 1,000 repetitions with practice pieces. Historians still argue whether the spiritual purification rituals performed by the smith before yakiaya were purely cultural tradition, or a psychological method to achieve the perfect, zen-like state of focus required for the split-second, irrevocable action. Does the ritual clear the mind for the body's work, or invite a divine hand to steady it? In the aftermath, as steam curls to the rafters, the question hangs with the vapor. The blade is out. It is whole. It has survived its first death, and been reborn harder than before. But it is not yet safe. It is singing its internal stresses in a language of pops and creaks, and you must now listen to its song, and see if it holds a fatal note. The blade steams on a wooden rack, its newborn colors, indigo, straw, gunmetal gray, slowly darkening as it cools in the air. The forge is silent but for the soft hiss of the metal and the crackle of the dying hearth. This is not a time for action, but for acute, terrified listening. You and the smith stand over the blade, your ears straining. The blade is talking. It is releasing the titanic internal stresses locked inside it during the quench, and it will tell you its fate through sound. A faint ting, like a distant wind chime. A soft pop from near the tang. These are normal, the sound of the steel's crystalline structure settling, minor stresses evening out. They are the blade's sighs. You wait, your muscles tense. Then you hear it, a sound like a dry twig snapping, a distinct crack. It's not loud, but it's horrifyingly clear in the quiet. Your eyes dart to the smith. His face is a mask, but his eyes scan the blade's length frantically. A crack could be a death sentence. Sometimes, It's a superficial surface check in the Yakiba oxide layer, which can be polished out. Sometimes, it's a deep, structural fracture that travels into the harder, a fatal flaw. The blade has survived the water, but it may have been born mortally wounded. The smith picks up the cooled blade, peering along its length, tilting it in the light. He breathes on it, the moisture from his breath momentarily highlighting fine surface textures. He finds the source of the sound, a tiny, hairline crack in the Yakiba coloration, about a third of the way from the tip. He takes a small, hard steel rod called a kagioshi and taps the blade lightly near the floor, then listens to the ring. A clean, clear, long-lasting ring is good. A dull, flat, or truncated ring suggests a hidden delamination or crack. He taps, listens, his head cocked. The ring is clear. The sigh of relief is palpable. The crack is likely shallow, a surface trophy of the violence it endured. It will vanish in the rough polishing. This auditory diagnosis is a critical, often overlooked part of the craft. A widely accepted historical fact is that master polishers, later in the process, would also tap the blade and listen to its kanari, its metal cry, to assess its quality and integrity before beginning their months of work. The blade is a musical instrument, and its sound reveals the quality of its construction. Now, the smith examines the hamon. The temper line is now permanently etched into the steel's very constitution. With the bulk of the clay gone, he can see the pattern clearly for the first time. Using a magnifying glass of polished rock crystal or water-clear quartz, he inspects the boundary. He is looking for the activity within the hamon, the sparkling, gritty crystals called nai, and the finer, mist-like particles called nioi. These are not flaws. They are the visual evidence of the martensitic transformation, the hardened edge's microstructure made visible. A bright, active hamon full of nai suggests a high-carbon, vigorously quenched edge. A softer, more muted nioi-based hamon indicates a slightly lower carbon content or a slower quench. He is also checking for continuity. The hamon should travel unbroken from the hamachi, the notch at the base of the blade, all the way to the tip. A break or a sudden fade could indicate a soft spot. Here's a lesser-known, poetic detail. Within the hamon, smiths look for specific formations that have names. Kintsugi, golden streaks, are bright, lightning bolt lines of nai that shoot through the hamon. Tsunagashi, brushing sand, looks like, well, streaks of sand blown across the pattern. These are celebrated as marks of a dynamic, healthy quench and are highly prized aesthetically. They are the frozen signature of the water's embrace, unique to that single blade on that single day. The blade has also acquired its final curve, the sorai. The smith measures it against a simple wooden template, a curved board. The curve should be smooth and centered. But often, the violent, asymmetric cooling causes the blade to warp sideways as well, bending left or right in what's called a ta. This is expected. This is why the next step exists. Historians still argue whether the specific patterns of nai and nioi, the ashi legs, and other features within the hamon were consciously manipulated by the clay recipe and application to optimize mechanical performance, like crack deflection, or if they were purely emergent aesthetic phenomena that smiths later learned to reproduce because they were beautiful. Was the beauty a happy byproduct of the strength, or was an intuitive sense of beauty guiding them towards strength? The blade on the rack offers no answer, only its own breathtaking, fragile reality. The talking and cracking have subsided. The blade is now at room temperature, its new identity locked in. It is harder than it has ever been, and more fragile. It has sung its song of stress, and the song, while containing a minor discord, was not a dirge. It survived. The smith allows himself a small, tight smile. The worst is over. The blade has passed through the fire and water and been judged whole. But it is bent. It is rough. It is ugly. Now, you must gently, with a reverence bordering on fear, convince it to become straight. The blade is a sprung arc, a frozen shiver of stress. It is not merely curved along its spine as intended, it is also twisted, leaning to one side like a tree grown in a constant wind. This warp, this tear, is not a flaw. It is the inevitable consequence of the quench, a physical testament to the violence it survived. Correcting it is called yakimadoshi, literally, returning the bake, and it is the most nerve-wracking process since the plunge into the water. You are about to persuade hardened steel to change its mind. The smith builds a very small, gentle fire. Not the roaring forge hearth, but a low bed of coals. The blade must be heated, but with exquisite caution. If you bring it anywhere near the critical temperature again, you will ruin the hardness you just sacrificed so much to achieve. The target is a much lower, specific heat, around 200 to 250 degrees Celsius, 392 to 482 degrees Fahrenheit, the temperature at which the steel is just pliable enough to be nudged, but not so hot that its new martensitic crystals revert. How do you measure this without a thermometer? You watch for the oxidation colors. The smith slowly, evenly heats a section of the blade, usually starting near the tang where the metal is thickest and the risk is lower. You watch the steel's surface. As it warms, it begins to color again, first a faint straw yellow, then a deeper bronze, then a purplish blue, and finally a gray blue. He aims for the pale straw to light bronze range. It is a faint, delicate glow in a dim forge, more a suggestion of heat than a radiance. When the section reaches the right color, the smith swiftly transfers the blade to a special, low anvil. He doesn't hammer it. That would be catastrophic, introducing new, chaotic stresses or simply snapping the brittle steel. Instead, he uses leverage and steady, immense pressure. He may place the warmed, warped section over a rounded, hardwood block and press down steadily on the blade with his body weight, using long levering tools. You might hold one end, providing counter pressure. There is a sound, a low, elastic creak. It is the sound of the steel's memory being rewritten. He holds the pressure for a moment, then releases, checks the straightness against a notched straight edge, and reheats the next section. It is a game of millimeters, of incremental persuasion. You heat a 3-inch segment, correct its bend by a hair's width, then move on. The process is agonizingly slow. One side of the blade may be under tension, the other in compression. You are trying to rebalance them without letting that tension release all at once in a crack. A widely accepted historical fact is that this straightening process was so critical and skilled that a blade with a perfect hamon but a significant, uncorrected warp was considered inferior to a straighter blade with a less dramatic temper line. Function dictated form. The blade had to be true. The smith's entire being is focused on feel. He is listening to the steel, feeling its resistance through the levers. He is also constantly checking the hamon. The low heat of yakimadoshi can sometimes slightly alter the colors of the temper line, darkening it or bringing out additional utsuri, a shadowy reflection of the hamon on the blade's body, which is often desirable. But too much heat will destroy it entirely. It's a second, delicate dance along the cliff's edge. A lesser known, fascinating detail involves the use of water during this process. Sometimes, after applying pressure to a heated section, the smith might dab a wet cloth on the spot he just worked, causing rapid local cooling that sets the correction in place. It's a micro-quench, a tactical freezing of the new shape before the steel can think to spring back. This requires an almost supernatural sense of timing and temperature. You work for hours, maybe across 2 days, moving incrementally down the blade, correcting the lateral warp, and occasionally adjusting the main curvature, sorai, if it is too pronounced or not pronounced enough. It is mentally exhausting. Every creak makes you flinch, expecting the ping of failure. Historians still argue whether the ability to perform successful yakimedoshi was what truly separated a competent smith from a master, as it required an intuitive, almost conversational understanding of the steel's will after its trauma, a skill that could never be fully written down, only demonstrated and felt. Finally, the smith lays the blade on the straight edge. It touches perfectly from habakimoto to kisaki. He sights down its length. It is straight. The curve is graceful and even. He holds it up and gives it a gentle flex with his hands, not enough to bend it, but to feel its spring. It is alive, resilient. The worst is truly over now. The blade has been quenched and straightened. It is a coherent, functional entity. But it is still grotesque. It is coated in black scale and the remnants of burnt clay, its shape crude, its surface rough. It looks like something dug from a battlefield grave. All its beauty, all its legend, is hidden beneath this charcoal chrysalis. The next phase will not be about force or heat, but about revelation. You will begin, with stone and water, the long, meticulous archaeology of uncovering the masterpiece within the monstrosity. The blade, now straight and true, is a sooty, scaled, and ugly thing. It holds its secret beauty locked behind a crust of oxidation and the ragged topography of its forged surface. To reveal it, you begin the long, slow, meditative violence of the grind. This is not the final polish. This is the brutal honesty of the foundation work, called shitaji togi. You are not an artist yet. You are a miner, excavating the sword's true form from the mountain of its rough bouth. You are in a different part of the workshop now, at a low, sturdy bench alongside a water trough. The first stone is the largest and coarsest, a kongaseki, diamond stone, or a rough aratotu. It's a block of abrasive grit bound together, its surface like gritty sandpaper. You must first secure the blade. You wrap the tang in paper and then in a braided cord, creating a handle called a togibo. This protects your hands and gives you leverage. The blade is then placed on a wooden stand that holds it at a precise angle over the stone, which is constantly lubricated with water from a dipping brush. You do not move the blade freely. You learn a specific, rocking, pushing motion, using the weight of the blade and your own body to guide it, not your arm muscles. It is a full-body rhythm, slow and deliberate. The first passes produce a horrifying sound, a harsh, grating esky, and a black, soupy slurry of water, stone dust, and steel filings. Your goal is to remove all the forged scale and the outermost damaged metal, and to begin establishing the blade's final geometry. You are defining the flat planes, G, and the bevels, shinogi G, with absolute precision. The smith's hammer gave it shape, your stones are giving it truth. You must ensure the shinogi line is straight and sharp, the mune ridge is even, and the curvature is consistent along its entire length. This is physically grueling. The coarse stone bites hard, and maintaining the perfect, consistent angle for hundreds of strokes is an act of intense concentration. Your back aches, your shoulders burn, and your world narrows to the line of contact between stone and steel. A widely accepted historical fact is that the traditional Japanese sword polishing craft is a separate, esteemed profession from swordsmithing. A master polisher, a togishi, trains for decades. His work is considered the final stage of the blade's creation, as vital as the forging. He doesn't just shine it, he reveals and interprets the smith's work, making the hidden features visible. You are now an apprentice in that separate, sacred discipline. As you work, the blade begins to change. The black scale peels away to reveal the brighter metal beneath. But it's not pretty. It's a dull, scratched gray, like a fogged mirror. You are also removing a significant amount of material. The rough blank the smith made was oversized, anticipating this removal. One of the key, lesser-known challenges here is dealing with the hamon. At this coarse stage, the temper line is invisible. You must grind the blade evenly, knowing that the edge steel is now glass hard and the body steel is much softer. If you apply uneven pressure, you can create low spots or, worse, bone through the thin hard skin at the edge, ruining the hammer before it's even seen. It's an act of faith, grinding towards a ghost. You progress through a series of slightly finer stones, each one removing the scratches left by the previous. Binswitu, then kaiseitu. The sound softens from a shriek to a steady, sandy s. The slurry turns from black to gray to a milky white. You constantly rinse the blade and the stone, checking your progress with your fingers as much as your eyes. You feel for ridges, for dips, for any deviation from the perfect plane. The blade is cooling in your hands, its true weight and balance emerging as the excess metal falls away as mud. Historians still argue whether the specific angle of the blade's planes, the geometry of its cross-section, was primarily determined by the smith's forging, the polisher's interpretation, or a negotiation between the two based on the school's style and the blade's intended use. Was the final, deadly wedge shape forged or ground? The answer, you realize as your stones follow the contours the smith left you, is both. The smith provided the rough symphony, the polisher is tuning the instrument. After days of work with the foundation stones, you finally reach a stage where the blade is clean, geometrically true, and has a uniform, fine satin finish. The hammer is still not visible to the untrained eye, but in the right slanting light, you might see a faint, milky band where it lies dormant. The blade is no longer a crude object. It is a precise tool, lethal in its potential. But it is still mute. It has no voice, no story written on its surface. The next stones will not shape it, but awaken it. They will call forth the memory of the clay, the fire, and the water from deep within the steel. The excavation is over. The revelation is about to begin. The uniform, satin gray blade sits before you, a clean slate awaiting its history. Now, you move to the middle stage stones, the Hazuya and Congo grades. Your goal is no longer to shape, but to reveal. You are about to awaken the steel's soul, its harder grain pattern, and bring the hammer temper line out of hiding. This is where the polisher becomes a translator, interpreting the secrets locked inside by the smith and the quench. You begin with the Hazuya stone, a much finer, harder stone than the foundation set. Its slurry is white and fine as cake flour. Your technique changes. The strokes become shorter, more delicate, and even more precisely angled. You are now working on individual sections of the blade, the flat G, the ridgeline shinogi, the edge bevel, each with a slightly different stone and stroke to achieve a specific visual effect. For the flat body of the blade, you use a gentle, circular or elliptical motion. This isn't random, it's designed to abrade the steel in a way that highlights the jigan, the material's texture. As you work, a miracle occurs. The uniform gray begins to break up. A pattern emerges, like wood grain or the flow of water over sand. This is the harder, the forging pattern. It is the visual record of your hours of folding and welding, the layers of steel made visible. It might be a tight, swirling itame, wood grain, a straight masami, straight grain, or a dramatic mokume, burlwood. The stone's abrasive action cuts the harder and softer layers of the folded steel at slightly different rates, etching this history onto the surface. Seeing the harder for the first time is breathtaking. It is the blade's fingerprint, absolutely unique. It tells the story of the satetsu, the smelting, the folds. A widely accepted historical fact is that connoisseurs could often identify the school or even the individual smith by the characteristic look of the harder, just as an art expert recognizes brushstrokes. It is the first true beauty the blade has shown you, a beauty born directly from its strength. But you cannot linger. You must now tackle the hammer. This requires a different approach. The hammer is not a layer, it's a phase change in the steel. To make it visible, you use a technique called finger stones. You take a small, flat shard of a very fine, soft stone, often a type of uchigimori, and glue it to the end of a narrow bamboo stick. Holding this like a pencil, you will now draw along the hammer boundary. You don't grind the whole blade with this. You painstakingly polish only the hammer area itself, with strokes perpendicular to the line. This localized, ultrafine polishing creates a slightly different light reflective quality on the martensitic edge steel compared to the paleolithic body. It's an optical trick, a contrast enhancer. As you work the finger stone along the ghostly line you know is there, it begins to appear. It is faint at first, a pale, milky band. Then, as you refine it, details emerge, the undulations, nota, the clusters, gunome, the rhythmic peaks and valleys the smith painted in clay months ago. Then, within the band, finer details, the sparkling night crystals, like stars in a fog, and the mistier neoi clouds. You are not creating these, you are uncovering them, cleaning the windows so the internal crystalline structure can be seen. It is meticulous, eye-straining work. A slip of the finger stone onto the body or the edge can mar the perfect contrast you are building. A lesser-known, critical aspect of this stage is dealing with utsuri, a ghostly reflection of the hammer that sometimes appears on the blade's body above the true temper line. It's a secondary hardening effect. Some polishers, depending on the school's style, will actively try to bring out a bright utsuri using specific stones and pastes, considering it the mark of a superior blade and quench. Others will subdue it if it's too distracting. This decision is a form of artistic curation. You spend days on the hammer alone, moving to even finer Congo stones to sharpen the contrast and clarity. Historians still argue whether the breathtaking hammer patterns we admire today are a fully accurate representation of the original quench line, or if centuries of polishing tradition have stylized their presentation, much like a photographer choosing a filter or contrast level to highlight certain features of a landscape. Is the polisher a neutral reporter, or a creative collaborator in the blade's final aesthetic? As you manipulate light and texture with your finger stones to make the knife pop, you feel like the latter. You are giving the blade its voice. Finally, you step back. The blade is transformed. It is no longer a gray tool. It is a canvas of flowing grain and a vibrant, white, dancing temper line. It has a personality now, a face. It is stunning. But it is not finished. It is, in a way, too vivid, too raw. The final stage awaits, not to add more detail, but to harmonize it, to give it depth, softness, and a lethal, silent clarity. The blade now shines, but it must learn to whisper. The blade now possesses its two great voices, the deep, flowing chorus of the harder grain and the bright, singing line of the hammer. They are vivid, almost loud, on the surface. The final polish, shurjtogi, is not about making it louder. It is about refinement, harmony, and the creation of devastating subtlety. You put away the stones that cut and reveal. Now, you pick up the stones that whisper. The first of these final steps is the jizuya, a finishing stone so fine its slurry feels like slick, oily water. Your strokes are long, fluid, and feather-light. You are no longer trying to abrade. You are burnishing, aligning microscopic scratches into a uniform direction that catches the light in a specific, soft way. On the flat G body, you create a misty, matte finish called jifu. It's not a mirror, it's a soft, pearlescent gray, like still water at dawn. This finish is intentional. It provides a quiet background against which the harder grain appears to float in 3 dimensions, and it reduces glare that could blind the wielder in sunlight. You achieve this by using the jizuya with a specific, consistent stroke pattern, often diagonal, that covers the entire plane evenly. Next, you turn to the hadori, the polishing of the edge bevel and the hamon itself. For this, you use the finest of the finger stones, slivers of uchigimori or narataki, often rubbed against a base stone to create a paste of unimaginable fineness. You apply this paste with your fingertips or a small cloth, working it into the steel with gentle, circular motions directly on the hamon and the area just above it. This process, called migaki, brings out the final, breathtaking activity within the temper line. The Nai crystals become not just visible, but three-dimensional, glittering like frost. The Nioi clouds take on depth and softness. You are essentially lapping the steel to a near-mirror finish in this zone, creating a stark, beautiful contrast against the matte G. The shinogi G, the flat between the ridge and the edge, is often given a different, intermediate finish, creating a gradient of light from the soft G to the brilliant edge. A widely accepted historical fact is that this final polishing could take as long, or longer, than all the previous grinding stages combined. It is a test of patience and aesthetic judgment. Every stroke must be perfect. A single errant scratch from a coarse grain caught under your finger could force you back days, redoing an entire sequence of stones. The polisher works in a scrupulously clean environment, his tools and hands washed constantly. Now, you address the edge itself, the ha. This is not sharpened in the conventional sense of a kitchen knife. You use a series of specialized, incredibly fine straight-edge stones to hone the very tip of the bevel to its final, acute geometry. The goal is to create a fukura, curve, on the kissing tip that is perfect, and an edge line that is geometrically straight when viewed, but microscopically serrated from the crystalline structure, a natural saw that lends it terrifying cutting power. You test the edge not by shaving hair, yet, but by feeling its kais or bite against your thumbnail. It should catch with a gritty, definitive sensation, not slide smoothly. Here's a lesser-known, almost mystical detail. The final act often involves sashikomi, the application of a unique staining paste made from iron oxide and clove oil, or other secret mixtures. This paste is rubbed into the G and gently heated with a charcoal. It doesn't change the color dramatically, but it deepens the hues of the hada, adds a faint, protective patina, and is said to enhance the visibility of the utsuri ghost hamon. It is the blade's makeup, applied to highlight its best features before its debut. As you complete the polish, you perform the final inspection. You hold the blade in diffused daylight, rotating it slowly. The hada should look like it flows beneath the surface, not sits on top of it. The hamon should be bright, continuous, and full of lively activity. The lines of the blade should be flawless, each plane distinct, each transition crisp. Historians still argue whether the ultimate goal of the traditional polish was to achieve a specific, standardized ideal of beauty as defined by centuries of tradition, or to individually complete each unique blade according to its own inherent characteristics, like a tailor finishing a bespoke suit. Is the polisher enforcing a canon, or liberating an individual? Looking at the blade in your hands, which now seems to hold light within its steel, you feel you have done both. You have followed the rules to set the spirit free. The blade is complete. It is a symphony in steel and light. It is razor-sharp, stunningly beautiful, and imbued with the history of every step, from riverbank to this moment. It is a naked soul, however. It has no handle, no guard, no scabbard. It cannot be held, cannot be wielded. Its journey is almost over, but it must now be dressed for its life in the world. It must be fitted with the equipment that will make it not just an object of art, but a katana. The polished blade, the toshin, rests on a stand of pure white wood, a single, stark line of captured lightning. It is complete in itself, a perfect and lethal work of art. But it is not yet a sword. A sword is a tool for the hand, a companion for the body. To become that, it must be married to its fittings. You are not the one to do this. Your journey as forger and polisher ends here. Now, you step back and witness the final collaborations, as a master sword fitter, a shirogensha or koshirisha, takes custody of your creation. He receives the blade with a solemnity matching your own. His first act is to measure it with exquisite precision, every length, every curve, every thickness. These measurements will dictate every other component. He begins with the habaki, the metal collar that fits over the blade's tang at the base. It is a seemingly simple copper or gold alloy wedge, but its fit must be absolutely perfect, creating a seamless transition from blade to hilt and locking the blade securely in the scabbard. He forges it, files it, and presses it onto the tang with a soft mallet. The thok of a perfect fit is a satisfying sound. Next comes the tsuka, the hilt. He selects a piece of seasoned hardwood, often hoe, magnolia, and splits it to sandwich the tang. The two halves are carved to precisely cradle the tang, then glued together with rice paste. But the hilt is not just wood, it must be gripped. This is where the samagawa comes in, the skin of a ray or shark. The rough, pebbled skin, dyed dark blue, black, or russet, is softened and wrapped tightly over the wood, its tiny, tooth-like nodules providing a non-slip surface even when soaked in blood and rain. Over this, the tsukamaki artist will weave the silk or cotton cord, the ito, in intricate, diamond-patterned knots, hishimaki. Incorporating the menuki, small decorative ornaments of carved metal that sit under the wrap, their shapes felt through the binding, providing both aesthetic beauty and a tactile reference for the hand's placement. The guard, the tsuba, is a world in itself. It might be a simple iron roundel from a conservative school, or a lavish, pieced masterpiece in gold or copper alloy depicting dragons, landscapes, or poems. It is forged, chiseled, and often inlaid by a separate metal artist. It is slid onto the tang, a moment where function meets profound art. The seppa washers on either side secure it with a quiet firmness. Finally, the scabbard, the soyo. Crafted from lightweight hoe wood, it is carved from two halves, hollowed to an exact mirror of the blade's curvature and profile, then glued together. The interior is finished with a fine abrasive paste to ensure a smooth, frictionless draw. It is then lacquered, sometimes in simple, deep black, roiro, sometimes in decorative patterns, moki, a craft unto itself requiring dozens of layers and months of drying. The koiguchi, mouth, and kojiri, end cap, are fitted, often with buffalo horn or metal. A widely accepted historical fact is that the mounting of a sword was considered a separate, high art form, with distinct schools and masters specializing in tsuba making, tosagu, lacquerwork, nurimono, and hilt wrapping, tsukamaki *. A daimyo might commission a blade from one famous smith, a mounting from another set of artists, and keep them as separate, combinable treasures. The blade was the soul. The koshiri, mounting, was its temporary, changeable body. You watch as the fitter performs the final assembly. He slides the blade into its soyo. It enters with a soft, whispering sk and seats with a barely audible click. He then assembles the hilt components onto the tang, finishing with the kashira, pummel cap. The final act is to drive in the mekugi, a small bamboo peg that passes through the tsuka and a hole in the tang, locking everything together. This peg is the only thing holding the blade in the hilt. It is designed to fail under extreme stress, allowing the hilt to fly off rather than transmit a braking force to the blade itself. One last piece of ingenious, sacrificial engineering. He presents the completed katana to you, laid across his outstretched palms. It is no longer a naked blade. It is a complete entity. The polished steel peaks from the habaki and the mouth of the scabbard, a hint of the sleeping dragon within. The hilt wrap is a geometric promise of grip. The tsuba winks in the light. It has presence. It has weight, both physical and spiritual. A lesser-known, poignant detail. The finished sword, in its full mounting, was often given a name, sometimes by its smith, sometimes by its owner. This name, like Kogarasu, Little Crow, or Dojigiri, Slayer of Shutendoji, would be inscribed on the scabbard or recorded in inventories, personalizing an object that was already, through its making, profoundly individual. He places it in your hands. The balance is perfect, the center of gravity just before the guard. It feels alive, an extension of your arm waiting to happen. Historians still argue whether the true soul of the samurai sword lies in the toshin blade itself, the product of sacred fire and water, or in the complete katana as a functional, wearable, mortal object of art and authority. Is it the spirit, or the spirit embodied? Holding it now, feeling the wood, the ray skin, the silk, and knowing the heart of folded steel inside, you understand the question is its own answer. They are inseparable. The journey from ore to polished steel is complete. The steel's journey into history is just beginning. The weight of the finished katana rests in your hands, not as a burden, but as a quiet culmination. The relentless months of fire, hammer, water, and stone now condense into this singular, poised stillness. The rivers whisper, the furnaces roar, the hammers chant, the stones hiss. They have all faded, leaving only the soft sound of your own breath in the quiet workshop. The blade sleeps in its scabbard, its brutal both and meticulous awakening now a secret held in the flow of its grain and the frozen dance of its hamon. You have witnessed chaos coaxed into order, and order elevated into art. The pursuit of perfection has ended, not in a shout, but in a profound and graceful silence. Tonight, let that silence settle around you. Feel the memory of the heat dissipate from your mind, the ache of labor soften into a distant echo. The journey is done. The story is told. The sword exists, a testament to patience and transformation. There are no more fires to tend, no more strokes to count. Just the deep, calm certainty of something brought, through immense struggle, to its perfect and rightful state. Allow your thoughts to blur at the edges, like the misty nioi within the temper line, softening into sleep. The work is complete. The rest is dream.